Welcome and thank you for joining us for another Infinity Kingdom guide. This guide is part of my series on fire builds. As always, you can find a ton more guides on the YouTube channel and you can read all my articles as well as find a ton of Infinity Kingdom game information on the official IK Wiki website. Subscribe down below and check out the links in the description. Today we are going to have a look at how to build a strong secondary march using fire element. This guide is for mid-spenders past the initial conquest stage of Legion of Frostborn. You need both Seon and Trajan to make this build. If you want to run something less conquest dependent, I highly recommend you stay tuned for my upcoming guide on dual mage fire as a secondary setup. If you are a mid-spender and want a balanced magic physical march for your secondary team, this is it. It performs extremely well in almost all combat scenarios, meaning you can reliably do a ton of damage against anything, making this a great team to join rallies with while you use your main on garrisons or solo hits. I personally loved having fire as my secondary team until I reached a full holy march. Why? Because as you develop you will need a secondary team that is adaptable and easily changed when the meta changes and you need other passive skills in your main. Fire is easy to adapt and will perform quite well in multiple different setup versions. Secondly, fire scales very well from many of the second rank passives. Especially the blessing and grace effects are much stronger on fire than anywhere else, because of the way the fire dragon's third skill works to boost immortal damage every time a buff is applied, hence from all blessings and graces. Lastly, having fire as your secondary setup is very powerful because of boss farming. You want to have a setup that can reliably kill bosses as you are growing and developing your dragons. Fire does that extremely well. In fact, fire with Yoshi added is the best boss killer in all of Infinity Kingdom. Check out my video on boss killing fire here on YouTube. Links down below. Before we get into the deep mechanics behind this setup, I want you to ask yourself, is fire the best second for you? Fire is very good as a secondary team, but there is a catch. If you are not able to achieve VIP level 13, you will have a hard time running a solid fire team because you are going to be behind on base crit value. Some argue that fire still perform very well without the VIP 13 buff. While I am not convinced that is entirely true, I personally would prefer a Lightning Hammurabi YSG or Khan secondary or a Merlin Dido Water as my second team if I was unable to reach VIP 13. I will try and get some example builds out soon. Okay, disclaimer done. Let's get into it. Here is my take on a mid-spender secondary fire march. This build is an offensive pure fire using both Wu and Seon backline. This build revolves around dealing massive amounts of damage in record times. By relying on crit buff stacking we are able to boost the output to crazy bursts. I want to reiterate what I said in the beginning of this video. This build can perform amazing as a main but also as a secondary team. What is so beautiful about this build is that the fire setup does not make or break if you are missing a few of the best passives. For instance, most players have to use Death Breath in their main march. But for the purpose of this build, you can swap it for Chaotic and still get the consistent procs on Seon's ultimate ability that you need. Furthermore, not many builds have blessings and graces as the first choice passives. Well, they are all amazing on fire. Fire is all about dealing as much damage as you possibly can in the beginning of a fight. When you get ahead on troop count in the beginning of a fight, then fire wins. If you do not, fire loses. As such, grace and blessing skills are inherently amazing. As if that was not enough, graces and blessings also activate your dragon's unique effect during those first critical seconds of the fight for even more of a damage boost. This means your fire can burst down anything if you get the right procs and crits in a matter of seconds. Check out for example this fight. The fire secondary march killed the enemy main march lightning in just 29 seconds. Okay, let's dive a bit deeper and begin to understand why this fire build works so well. This setup revolves around pumping big burst damage from Wu and Seon. William and Trajan provides insane crit buffs pumping your backline damage dealers to the max. We do this by stacking critical hit value and combining our consistent crits with Seon's ultimate and chase on Wu. William adds a solid 20% crit rate and Trajan adds another 10% on top as well as a whopping 30% additional crit damage. Because we are scaling critical hit rate and critical hit damage, this setup scales extremely well with combat buffs adding a solid 5% boost to your critical hit rate. Furthermore, you want to get to VIP level 13 as quickly as possible to get the 9% base critical value boon. With William, Trajan, combat buffs and VIP boost you gain a solid 44% additional critical hit rate on top of the 30% critical hit value from your dragon and 30% crit damage. Needless to say, we rely on critical hits and all in all, making for a very powerful setups for Wu and Seon to deal massive damage. Let's pause here for a second and talk about our Immortal lineup. Whereas Hippolyta, many argue that Hippo is superior to Trajan in any fire setup. Whilst Hippolyta is certainly a strong Immortal, I do not agree with this view. In my opinion, Trajan works excellent for any fire build. We rely on getting critical hits, which he supplies both critical rate and critical damage for. However, if you are unable to obtain Trajan, Hippolyta's unique ability to consistently secure small critical hits and thus activating Seon's ultimate ability is also very powerful, and you can easily run this build with her if you are unable to get Trajan. Let us continue with the build guide. Moving on, we have the Tower of Knowledge passive setup. Building a secondary march is always a tricky thing. Players use different main marches and different passive setups. This means the passives you have available for your second and third teams are very different. In this guide, I assume that you have most of the S-tier passives in your main. Meaning you will have to find replacements for passives such as Annihilation, Death Breath, Fighting Master, Energy Suppression, Malice, etc. But wait a second. What if I don't use one of these in my main? To avoid issues of recommending second-tier skills to players who has the best available, I have added the ideal setup and then tested other passives as replacements. You will see one line with the best passives for each Immortal and then a second line with the passives that show the best results as alternatives to the ideal setup. For Empress Wu, the ideal passives are Chase, Annihilation and Death Breath. These are the best in slot passives because of how consistently you will get Chase procs while maintaining extremely high damage from your proccing passives. You will almost with absolute certainty not have Death Breath available. Most likely, Annihilation is also used elsewhere. You should however prioritize Chase here for certain. Which should not be a problem, your main is likely scaling just as well from concentration. What you end with on Wu as alternatives for Annihilation and Death Breath are Fire Nova, Toxic Nova, Concentration or Root. Yes, Root. You might have never looked at this because it's blue, but trust me. That thing is awesome. As for Seon, the best passives are Energy Burst, Fighting Master, and Garrote, Chaotic Blade. The idea here is to ensure as many casts of her ultimate ability as possible. If we make sure she casts her ability close to every 6 seconds, she will do absurd amounts of damage from the crit procs. As such, you want to not be stunned and have as much energy regen as possible. Since we are doing fire crit build and she is an Immortal with a ton of damage instances, Energy Burst works very well. Alternatives to these are Adrenaline Rush, Anger, and Absolute Defense. If you are unable to use Energy Burst or have neither Chaotic Blade nor Garrote available to proc Energy Burst, then you can use Adrenaline Rush. In this case, you can also use Anger as you will have a free spot from not having to have a proc ability like with Energy Burst. If you are unable to use Fighting Master, see if Absolute Defense is available. Maintaining troop count can be a big boost to Seon's damage. The best passives for Trajan are Weakness, Rage Blessing and Oaken-Guard. Weakness should be a priority, as this fire will scale much better from the added crit than any other setup. I recommend finding an alternative for your main if you used to do Weakness there and tossing Weakness to this fire. I do that myself. Alternatives to Rage Blessing and Oaken-Guard are Blessing of War, Blessing of Defense, Resist or Lifelink. You will almost by certainty not have Oaken-Guard available. As such, you should choose Blessing of War as your first priority for this spot. Last but not least, we have William. The best passives for William are Fighting Will, Energy Suppression, and Malice. William has quite high physical damage stats, giving nice value from Fighting Will. Also because we are glass cannons, we are going to hit the benchmarks fast in the second of control here and there has high value for us. Alternatives to all three passives are Blessing of Defense, Blessing of War, Resist and or Lifelink. Okay. That was it for the Fire Mid-Spender Secondary March. I hope you enjoyed this video. I have a lot of players come and ask me to do more build guides for secondary teams, so I thought I would give it a go. Let me know what you think in the comments and what content you would like to see more of here on the channel. Love you all and see you on the next one. Please ring the bell, like and subscribe to the channel. Stay updated on the latest new content and the latest builds by subscribing right here and now. I regularly put out new Infinity Kingdom content. The meta for PvP combat shifts constantly and I am always on to provide you the latest and best builds. Thank you for watching, and see you for the next one.